I can't express to you in enough words how serious that is. To the point where she told me she doesn't trust me. Now, I've never done anything to lose her trust. Like, I've never cheated on her. I've never lied to her. I've never stole from her. I've never done any of the things that would normally lead to somebody losing trust. But what I have done is my words haven't always matched my actions. Saying that we were going to do one thing and then my actions didn't follow through on my commitments. And that breeds distrust. Welcome back to the Be the Standard podcast, where we talk about your marriage, your money, and the mindset that you're going to have to manage both of those and become elite in all parts of your life. If you're new, welcome. I'm glad you guys are joining the show. And for those of you who are coming back, well, this is going to be a topic that's probably going to press you a little bit. Listen, me and my wife, Lizzie, we are in the last few weeks of being a 3-person household. Like, we are in week 37 of this pregnancy. And a lot of things are starting to change around here. I've been traveling every other week all year as I'm starting to build up my skill sets in this protege position that I've been running with my coach, which has really given me an opportunity to harness my skills in both speaking and selling and training and coaching and consulting, all of it. And on the flip side of that is the family piece of this, where I'm watching Lizzie continue to grow this baby, and we're getting further down the path of bringing a new son into our home. And when you're in this position of these massive milestones in your life, one of the things that can be difficult for both people is the ability to process what's going on. Like, there is a level of fear that Lizzie is feeling in bringing another baby into the world. Like, I can't even imagine what it must be like to push something out of your body. Like, taking a baby and pushing it out of your body. Like, there's no way. There's a 0% chance that I'd be able to do that as a man. No way. I don't have the pain tolerance. But there's this fear that she's feeling. One, about heading into the delivery, which I can completely understand. Knowing what you're about to feel because you've gone through it once. Lizzie did it all natural last time, and she's trying to go all natural this time, meaning no meds, no epidural, nothing. And I can imagine the fear that might come along with that. This uncertainty, this scariness to it, making sure your body's ready. She has this fear that she hasn't put in the same amount of work that she did with Luca, that she's been a little bit more lenient. And because she's constantly thinking about this and then layering the second piece on this of what is her postpartum experience going to be like. Because last time with Luca, I made the decision that I went back to work 48 hours after we came home from the hospital, which put her in a really tough spot. And so she's a little gun shy with this piece as well. And then you add a third layer below that of what is it going to be like to have a toddler and a newborn in the home while I'm traveling to and from California for the rest of the year. And I think what happens when she's in that state is she can tend to emotionally disconnect from me because she's in her own mind about things. She's not thinking about me at most of the time. She's either thinking about herself or the baby or Luca. And you know what? Rightfully so. That makes a lot of sense. But there's this emotional distancing that starts to happen. Conversely, I went from being at the top of the real estate game, top 1% of 1% of real estate agents in the country. And I made a pivot in my business because I felt called to serve men and to serve women in coaching. Now, what comes along with that is a whole level of not knowing what you don't know. Like, in real estate, it's different. Like, you have systems to plug into at a company level. You have a product to sell, a home, and you have a process to follow. Like, the ability for you to follow this process that's been repeatable and duplicatable, and it'll show you how to do it. Coming into starting a coaching business, yes, there's some frameworks on how you can build this out, and yes, there's a process to do it, but there's not a company to plug into. Like, I'm the business now. When I thought was entrepreneurship before was just me being a solo business owner. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking it. But the stressors that have come along with starting a new business are very different than the ones I experienced in starting a real estate business. And I think what's happening right now is there's a drop in income, right? We went from 7 figures down to low 6 figures, so about $120,000 last year. And then from there as well, there's this growing of skill sets and mindsets and resources. And there's this constant unraveling of limiting beliefs and self-doubt. And then there's this personal growth piece that gets accelerated because you're forced to have this confidence and certainty that you must build in yourself by doing the reps. But along all of that, all I'm thinking about is what? Myself and the business. So that emotional distancing that's happening is also happening on my end. And what I've experienced in our relationship, and it's at nobody's fault, I think it's just what happens when you are in these massive milestones in a relationship, is that the two of you start to slowly distance from one another. And it's not intentional, it's not malicious, it just happens. But the emotional distancing can happen because of stress. And what can really lead to is this feeling of a lack of support and a lack of connection. And when there's a lack of support and a lack of connection present, what that can start to lead to is like there's no emotional intimacy between the two of you, which can also lead to a lot of resentment and potential emotional baggage. So you have to think about this emotional distancing thing as something that will cascade eventually and will impact all parts of your life. I felt this with the first time with Luca. I was in my own head about running my business then, and Lizzie was in her own head about raising the kids. I didn't do a good job as a father to start out. I was so focused on trying to provide for the family, which I was doing, but I wasn't providing for the relationship. And so the emotional distancing that took place is something that I'm still trying to overcome now. Like when I tell you the story that Lizzie is gun shy about this postpartum, I can't express to you in enough words how serious that is. To the point where she told me she doesn't trust me. Now, I've never done anything to lose her trust. Like I've never cheated on her. I've never lied to her. I've never stole from her. I've never done any of the things that would normally lead to somebody losing trust. But what I have done is my words haven't always matched my actions. Saying that we were going to do one thing and then my actions didn't follow through on my commitments. And that breeds distrust. So the emotional distancing that's happening is coming from this moment when I was completely separated from everything else in the family, thinking that I was doing the right thing, but realizing that I never had a playbook or a blueprint on how to pull this off. I was just doing the best with what I had at the time. And when you emotionally distance from your partner and it feels like an insecure or a lack of, not even insecure, like there's a lack of security and comfort in the relationship, what happens to both people is they start to go into protection mode. And that can look a lot like not opening up to your partner, not talking to your partner about what you're going through. And when you're sitting at dinner, somebody will ask, like, how's your day? And you won't give them an actual response. You'll be like, oh, it was good. Or if they ask if everything's okay, you'll say, oh, I'm just tired. It's this fear of being able to open up and actually express what you're afraid about. Because on the other side of that, like what happens if you express that you feel distant from your partner and you tell them like you don't feel comfortable with where the relationship's at. And now all of a sudden they get defensive and it could lead to a fight. And maybe that fight leads to adding stress to the baby or adding stress to the business, which impacts money coming in. Or maybe that fight leads to voices being raised. Now all of a sudden your other kids are watching and you're giving them a framework about what conflict in a marriage should look like. So there's all these different factors that start to come into play. And one of the biggest things is that when there's this distancing of the emotional connection, there's also a lot of stress that starts to come into play. Because then what it feels like is that you're no longer on a team, that you're leading this relationship individually. And when you feel like you're leading a relationship, but you're doing it like individually, not on the same team, well, you put yourself on an island. And when you're on an island, you're constantly looking at the other person being like, oh, it must be nice to be able to do what you're doing. I'm over here busting my ass. Lizzie has said that to me because I would go on trips and I would, go to work and do all of these things. And she was frustrated with me. Conversely, I would look at her and be like, it must be nice. You don't have to worry about making money or, providing for the family the same way that I do. Now, neither partner is right. It's all in the perspective. But what I will say is that doesn't stem from an emotionally connected relationship. That happens when you're both emotionally disconnected. So one of the ways in order to kind of like notice these things is you have to listen to the words that your wife is saying. When she starts to say stuff like, it must be nice, there is a layer of resentment that's built in there that is probably going to need you to do some uncovering. But what that's going to require from you fellas is the ability for you to sit there and be calm and not allow your pride or your ego to get into the way. Because some of the stuff that she's saying is going to be true. And you can either step into that conversation trying to win the argument, or you can step into that conversation seeking to understand and trying to get what you want, which is to reestablish the connection that you have with your wife. Because in absence of that, a lot of the other things start to fall away too. There's not going to be any physical intimacy. There's not going to be any date nights. There's not going to be any cuddling. There's not going to be any deep conversations. There's not going to be any laughter and fun. If there's not safety in the relationship, all of those things start to go away. And emotional distancing usually happens because there's a lack of stress management. There's also a lack of vulnerability, which is a huge place because in order to reconnect emotionally, in order for you to really start to cultivate emotional intimacy, there's going to require you to have some hard conversations. And you can usually cultivate this, right, by sharing things maybe before you fully process them. One of the things that my coach, Tim Adams, encouraged me to do was start to voice where I'm at a little bit more frequently. I have a tendency to like to process things before I share them, mostly because I think like it's going to protect Lizzie versus allowing her to just kind of be in my mess. Like when it's my mess, it is fucking so dusty or something. My nose is killing me. I don't want to have her to process my mess because it's my mess. So what I tend to do is I'll hold these things in until I can journal on it or stack on it or have a conversation with my coach about it, because I want it to be in a place where I can present it to her that, hey, I've worked through this here. But what that does is it doesn't allow for them to be with you along the journey. And if anything, it makes them feel even further away from you, like you're hiding something from them. But that level of vulnerability means you're going to open yourself up to potential criticism, conversations, or just feeling like you are fully exposed. And the one thing I want to remind you is that the woman that you're in a relationship with, like you love her and she loves you back. So your ability to have these conversations and share these things, it's the ultimate sign of like you just wanting to have that deep connection with her. Like you have to cultivate this. But the only way for you to cultivate this emotional intimacy, at least in my experience, is like you have to create the right settings for it. Having kids makes these conversations really difficult. Having a busy schedule and being an entrepreneur makes these conversations really difficult. Having Lizzie be a stay-at-home mom makes these conversations really difficult unless you can create time, space, and conditions for these things. So we have to get to a place where vulnerability and emotional transparency is the principle of like what we start to build. Because the only way to go from a disconnected, emotionally distant marriage to an emotionally connected marriage and to walk that path to go from here to there is that you have to start to not only change your mindset around vulnerability and emotional transparency, but you have to be willing to lead it first, guys. In my experience, like Lizzie's not going to be the one that's going to lead the relationship on where it's going to go. That's on me. Call it what you want to call it, but as the man, I feel the responsibility to not only build the container of safety and security, hold that container, but also pour into the container. And what I mean by pouring into the container is leading by the way I live, sharing where I'm at, and just being like, listen, babe, like I know this is going to sound messy, and I know this is going to seem a little, maybe incongruent, or it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I share this with you just because I'm still processing it, but I don't want you to feel like I'm not being open with you. And something just as simple as that can give her permission to just sit in your shit with you. And you can tell her to be like, listen, I don't need you to fix this. I'm not asking for advice. Maybe you are asking for advice, but being clear on what it is that you're doing and maybe what it is that you need is going to be critical. What that's going to allow her to do is do the exact same. She can come back to me and be like, listen, I'm struggling with this, Sergio. Like, I'm really afraid that, like, when you leave to go to Dana Point, that I'm going to have a toddler here and a baby, and I'm not going to know how to handle both. And without proper coverage and care, like, I'm afraid that I'm going to burn out and I'm not going to be the mother I want to be. That conversation actually happened. But it never would have happened if I hadn't been willing to completely just expose myself. One of the hardest things that I had to tell Lizzie was that in me being vulnerable with her, I was afraid that she was going to use it against me. For whatever reason, and I'm still trying to explore this, so I'm processing this real time as I share this with you, is I'm trying to figure out where this feeling of me being vulnerable with her makes me feel emasculated. Where this fear of me becoming this domesticated husband, a purse boy, where I just do whatever she wants. I do anything that she asks. I respond to her like I don't have my own identity. For whatever reason, that's like a fear. And as I'm talking about this, here's where I realize it came from. It's funny how this plays out. It comes from previous relationships of getting cheated on and then me trying to prove myself to them. And then when I would prove myself, they would still take advantage of it and use it against me, and they would gaslight me. And it's interesting how if we don't start to go back and heal some of these things in us and really explore some of these deeper things, which once this is over, I'm going to need to go back and do, it can start to resurface itself in our relationships that we are trying to build. So here's what I want you to sit with. There's two kind of principles that I want you to live by, or at least understand this piece. Number one is scheduled emotional check-ins. Lizzie and I have a weekly ritual. We try to do it on Sundays during Luca's nap time. But it's an opportunity for us to like look at the calendar and kind of just figure out like what's working, what's not, where are we, what do we have coming up, where do I need support, and what are you doing? And it's that ability for us to be able to sit in that space where we know it's scheduled, where we know we're not going to get interrupted, that then allows us to express and check in with one another. You got to think about this. Like, if you are going through your life and you know that there's never going to be an opportunity for you to truly express how you feel, well, then it's just going to start to build up and build up and build up. And before you know it, something's going to happen and you're just going to unleash, and it's all going to come out at once. And you're going to say shit that you didn't mean to say. You're going to do things that you didn't mean to do. And you're going to end up in a conversation or a fight that could have been avoided completely. So scheduling like these regular check-ins is going to be critical. And what it's also going to allow to do is that when you go on date nights, these aren't the conversations you're having. On date nights, if you've done your emotional check-ins, it's going to give you an opportunity to actually connect with each other on a deeper level. Maybe talk about dreams and aspirations and that type of thing. Versus being like, I can't believe last week you didn't help me with Luca when I needed whatever. The second one is just emotional transparency and forgiveness. This is way easier said than done, just like most things in a relationship. Emotional transparency. Like, how can you openly discuss the past issues that are dictating your current behaviors? When I told Lizzie about me being insecure and being emasculated and feeling like she was going to run over me, I told her, I was like, listen, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't even say it's fucking logical. I'm just being very transparent with you about where I'm at because I don't fully understand it. Now I get to go have a conversation with her about what I just shared with you. But in that place, me being open like that gives her permission to forgive me, because all emotions are okay, all behaviors are not. So my ability to express my emotions, that's completely fine. But if my emotions lead to me having a sharp tongue or me being an asshole or doing things that are incongruent and out of alignment with our own family values and our relationship values, that shit's not okay. So being emotionally transparent allows her to forgive maybe some of the things that I've done so that when I apologize, she has context. For all of you, you're going to need to understand, and I say this to me just as much as I say this to you, marriages and business is hard. And stress is going to come from both. You're going to be stressed in your marriage. You're going to be stressed having kids. You're going to be stressed. Then you're going to have stress in your business and stress in your personal life or in your own life. And if you're not careful, these things can easily create division between the two of you. But I'll also have you consider that these things, these stressors in you as a parent, and your stressors at home, and then your stressors in business are actually opportunities for you to connect. And if you can be just open and honest about them, and you can make space to talk to them, what you're going to find is that emotional distancing that was once taking place is actually going to be the complete opposite. It's going to bring you closer together. It's going to facilitate better conversations. And on the back end of that is a much happier marriage, a much better sex life, and a couple that is moving through life in lockstep together. So, I want you to share this with your partner. I also want you to implement this into your marriage this week. This is Sergio Nazaro, founder of Be the Standard, where we cover everything with marriage, money, and your mindset. Until next time, take care.